So I call this meeting to order. Welcome back to meeting number 124 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We are resuming our meeting of Friday, October 18th, 2024. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. So we are resuming debate on the sub-amendment of Mr. McGregor to the amendment of Mr. Lloyd to the motion of Mr. McGregor. Since we have some people here that weren't present on Friday, I'll read the motion as it currently stands. The motion is that given the Royal Canadian Mounted Police report on violent criminal activities linked to agents of the Government of India from October 14, 2024, the Hague Commission's identification of foreign interference activities by Russia, Pakistan, China, and Iran, and the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians' special report on foreign interference in Canada's democratic processes and institutions, the Chair reports to the House that the committee calls for all federal party leaders to apply for the appropriate security clearance level in the next 30 days in order to review classified information and take necessary actions to protect Canadians. To which Mr. Lloyd has moved an amendment that we release the names of all members of Parliament and all parliamentarians who are alleged to have interfered and knowingly colluded with foreign powers, to which Mr. McGregor modified to read that the government release the names of all members of Parliament and all parliamentarians who are alleged to have interfered and knowingly colluded with foreign powers while protecting national security and those who gathered the intelligence. So that's where we stand. We're starting a new speakers list. We have Ms. Stancho, followed by Mr. Lloyd, and we will be vigilant in looking for hands going up. With that, we will pass the floor to Ms. Stancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this sub-amendment. I will note, Mr. Chair, I find it a bit disconcerting that we're talking about this amendment and sub-amendment, this motion, amendment, and sub-amendment in general. Just given, certainly even just today, the latest news on the India affair, it would appear that Canadian officials, for example, this sub-amendment is interesting because it talks about protecting national security, which is obviously important. And today we learned that it would appear that national security officials in Canada leaked information to the Washington Post that Canadians weren't made aware of, that Washington Post journalists have apparently a greater right to know information about this India issue than Canadians. And I think that is something that we could get into if we were studying the motion that we all agreed to review the India affair and bring in various deputy ministers, the CSIS director, the RCMP commissioner, a number of security officials and other experts to testify on some of the information they know when they knew it, and why is it that the Washington Post knew before Canadians. And I think that there's a number of issues, even just that aside, that could fill in a lot of the blanks of this important issue that I think a lot of Canadians are seized with, particularly Canadians in the Indian community, and particularly the Sikh community. And it just is a bit disconcerting that we're seeing various parties play politics with this issue. Our party's been very clear where we stand on this motion in particular. That's not going to change. And certainly I do feel that we could get back to the matter at hand, which I do believe all parties are interested in learning more about, particularly in light of the breaking news today out of the Globe and Mail from Bob Fife. And so certainly, Mr. Chair, I think we should be moving on and getting back to the study at hand. In particular, for example, if we were focusing on the study that we had passed as a committee, we could be asking the Commissioner today why it is that we had to learn from the Washington Post that the killing of an individual in Winnipeg has been linked to the whole India affair in general. Why is it that we had to learn in American news and that the RCMP didn't release that to the Canadian public? I would like to know that, amongst other things. So we could be doing that today. Instead, we're going to be focusing on playing politics. Unfortunately, this motion from the NDP, with presumably Liberal support, we've made our position very clear on this, and that's not going to change. So I'd ask the other members of other parties to consider us getting back to the matter at hand so we can focus on the India affair. Certainly, Mr. Chair, I think that it would be worthwhile, this committee, to immediately take up that study. I don't believe we could get to that perhaps today, but I would assume on Thursday we could move to have, or we could certainly, you could do the work to have various witnesses come and testify. And certainly, if we're looking at this, I do feel that the sub-amendment in general, I think that would be overall, I do feel that is implied in it, but I do feel that perhaps moving it was not, in general, this motion was not in the best of faith. We've made our position clear, as I said, and I do feel that we could be focusing on the matter at hand. And I do believe that all members of this committee are intelligent and can fight their corners with respect, and certainly have information put on the record that I think would be of public interest in the India affair issue. And certainly, Mr. Chair, again, just waking up today and seeing that we can repeatedly hear, for example, from the Prime Minister and others, that all these issues are classified, we can't talk about them, and yet it just seems, again, I don't believe this is the first time, in fact, that we're seeing various members of the American or various news outlets in the United States getting information before we got it. I believe, if you'll remember, Mr. Chair, actually, when there was that issue of the Chinese spy balloon, American news had more information about what Canadian intelligence knew than the Canadians themselves. So this isn't the first time that we're seeing issues like this. And so when we're talking about protecting national security, I would wonder what processes were followed that the Washington Post journalists were entitled to some of this information and that we weren't. And I do think that is an interest of this committee, certainly as the Public Safety National Security Committee. And then it should be with haste that we have a number of these witnesses come to testify. Perhaps we'll have them testify more than once, given the importance of this issue. So certainly I know we'll go through this today, but we've made our position very clear on this matter. We do not feel that this motion reflects the best interest of the duty of the opposition to hold the government accountable. That is our position, and that's not going to change, Mr. Chair. So again, I'd ask other parties to consider that, and if we can get to work as soon as Thursday on questioning members of CSIS and the RCMP and others, I think that would be of great public benefit to further understanding the details of this India affair, Mr. Chair. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I ask that you put me back on the speaking list.
Thanks, Ms. Dancho. We'll go to Mr. Lloyd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to echo the comments made by my colleague, Ms. Dancho, I think, or Mrs. Dancho. They very apt, disturbing that information was shared with a foreign media outlet, the Washington Post, before Canadians were made aware of the situation involving the allegations that a foreign government, in this case India, has been sponsoring acts of crime in our country, which is a concern of all Canadians when our sovereignty is impacted in this case. And I think, if the allegations made by the Globe and Mail are true, I think it illustrates a greater point, which speaks to the sub-amendment that my colleague, Mr. McGregor, put forward, where he talks about the release of the names must only be done in accordance with national security. And I'll say that at all times in my original sub-amendment, it's implied that we will not violate the safety of agents who are in the field in the release of any information. However, with the addition of this sub-amendment, I have concerns because it's clear to me that we have a government that feels that it can leak information if it's in their own political benefit. Information gets shared with groups like the Washington Post, information being leaked like the Prime Minister outrageously at the Hope Commission, selectively saying that he has information related to Conservative parliamentarians, which I think people in the media and across the country have rightly denounced and criticized as a blatant partisan act by the Prime Minister. We know from security officials that foreign interference is is a broad issue across this country, and for the Prime Minister to try to weaponize information that he's privy to in a way that is vague really puts a cloud of suspicion over all members of Parliament. And frankly, I think it devolves this foreign interference debate into a partisan debate when it really doesn't need to be. And I think the fact is, and so we will call this out, we will hold this government accountable when they put their own partisan interests above the national security of our country. And we know that this is a Prime Minister who's facing an internal revolt. He's facing numerous pressures, and he's attempting to distract in any way he can by outrageously using selective information that is curated to solely benefit himself politically and not to benefit the national security of our country. And I will note that, you know, this all could have been avoided. Our House Leader, Andrew Scheer, the Honourable Andrew Scheer, in the wake of findings from the NSICOP report that there were members of Parliament who were compromised by foreign interference, that Conservatives put forward a way forward that would respect our national security. In a letter that was put forward to Parliament, it was requested that the Hogue Commission be given a broader set of powers and be given a broader mandate in order to, and receive the unredacted information needed in order to reveal, when possible, the names of members of Parliament or other parliamentarians, both current and former, who have been implicated in foreign interference. And I think it's only fair that that those members of Parliament that are involved be notified about this, because they're under a cloud of suspicion and they need to have the ability to clear their names if they are innocent. And Canadians need to be given a chance to, you know, we're facing, there will be an election by October of 2025, guaranteed. And Canadians need to know that the air needs to be cleared, that our Parliament is free from these serious allegations of foreign interference. And, you know, I'm sure if this Liberal government had their way, you know, Canadians wouldn't even know that foreign interference was happening in this country. We saw the lengths that this government went to hide this very, this very serious information. The lengths that they went to even outright deny that foreign interference was happening. In the case of Minister Blair, when he came to this committee in his role as Minister for Emergency Preparedness, answering for his tenure as Minister of Public Safety, when he said that they had received no evidence that there was foreign interference in the 2019 and 2021 elections. This is the Minister of Public Safety saying this in 2022, and we now know from the Hogue Commission and from information that's been shared in the public space that there was indeed foreign interference that affected at least 8 ridings in the 2021 election. And I feel very personally about this because one of those members of Parliament was a good friend, Kenny Chiu, in Richmond, and his name was slandered. His name was slandered, and it was found to be agents of a foreign government that was using its arm in Canada and numerous assets in Canada to spread falsehoods that Mr. Chiu, himself a man of Chinese descent, was attempting to create a foreign agent registry that was going to list all Canadians of Chinese descent. A patently ridiculous idea and absurd, ludicrous, and yet, as we've seen with foreign misinformation and disinformation campaigns, a lie can spread around the world faster than the truth has a chance to tie its shoes. And Kenny Chiu was a victim of that. And there were a number of other, particularly conservative MPs, to the benefit of, in all these cases, Liberal MPs, coincidentally, that these conservative MPs lost their elections because of this foreign interference. And if it had not been for leaks from our national security apparatus, if it had not been for the work of the Hogue Commission and the work of enterprising journalists like Sam Cooper, Canadians would never have known about this serious threat to our country's national security. They would have never known the depths and the extent to which foreign powers, be they numerous, that are attempting to influence our country and attempting to intimidate politicians and intimidate diaspora communities in our country so that they don't participate in politics or that they vote out of fear instead of out of their own self-interest. And to see that kind of allow that to happen, I saw a journalist tweet on X the other day that it seems so quaint, the Canada of 2015 seems so quaint now after 9 years of this Liberal government, where, you know, certainly we can't rule out that there was no foreign interference prior to 2015. However, the extent of the foreign interference that we've seen in the last 9 years proliferating under this Liberal government is shocking. I think if you took somebody who was here in 2015 and they could travel forward in time and they woke up in 2024, they'd be shocked at what has happened to their country, what has happened to our country, where multiple, not just like one country, but multiple countries with different complicated layers of intrigue are actively interfering in our democratic system, in our public debate, and yet we have a government that said it wasn't even happening just a few short years ago. We have here, previous to this motion coming forward, a motion to explore the very serious issues of foreign interference in relation to the alleged threats of India threatening Canadian citizens, particularly citizens of the Sikh community. And these are very serious allegations. And the fact that we're not studying that right now, I think, is problematic. And I understand that we're dealing with a motion here today related to clearances. And we have a prime minister who has access to this top secret information, who has chosen to weaponize it for his own partisan ends, who has, with this information, who having this information, has failed to act for 9 years. In the case of one serious allegation involving a former Liberal member of Parliament, the Prime Minister, who had been fully briefed on the issues related to that member of Parliament, had stood up in the House and said that he looks forward to welcoming him back to caucus in the future. And for the Prime Minister, with the knowledge that he has, to make a claim like that is absolutely shocking. And it's only because of the fact that this information has not been transparent or has not been shared and has been basically keeping Canadians completely in the dark, that this has been allowed to continue, where the government has been able to get away with the selective release of national security information for the purpose of keeping Canadians in the dark about their members of Parliament. And the fact is that there's been lots of talk about the importance of getting these security clearances. However, it's also been noted quite effectively that even with these security clearances, there is basically nothing that any member of Parliament can do to act on these. It's been said earlier that the names can't be revealed. So if a leader of a party were to get clearance and receive information that one of their members was compromised by a foreign state, they couldn't kick that member out of caucus, because if there was a risk, as has been said, that that member, the information about that member had been gathered clandestinely by a member of our intelligence or our allies' intelligence, that it could compromise them. And so it's very limited. Like, I don't know how, like, what people expect when the Prime Minister, who has had this information for years, has had this information as long as he's Prime Minister, failed to act in numerous cases within his own party, He has not removed a single member of his caucus from caucus. There was a member that left caucus voluntarily, but the Prime Minister has failed to act on these issues. So I don't know how they can expect any other leader in this Parliament to be able to act on this information, especially when this information was ostensibly supposed to be shared with the Chief of Staff of the Conservatives, and they're being told that it's on a need-to-know basis. Well, I think the Chief of Staff needs to know. I think certainly the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister knows this information. And I know the Chief of Staff of the Conservative Party to be a man of honor, a man of integrity, and I think that's entirely suitable. And what we will not accept is a situation where our leader, who has been fighting the fight on foreign interference publicly in the House of Commons, would in any way be restricted in his ability to hold this Liberal government to account. We have Conservatives who are members of the NSICOP committee. We have a Chief of Staff who has top secret security clearance. We have all the tools that the government says we should have at our disposal. And yet, what I see here from the NDP and the Liberals is just a blatant attempt to prevent the leader of the opposition from doing his constitutionally mandated job, which is to hold this government accountable for its failures. And I think one of those chief failures is going to be remembered as their lack of action on foreign interference and what has allowed us to get to this point today. So with that, I'd like to get back to the very important debate that we're having about India. I was really sad to see that we didn't receive unanimous consent in the House. Yesterday, I heard a Liberal member deny consent to the starting of a committee to deal with this very important issue. But with that, I would like to move with a motion to adjourn, and I'd like a recorded vote, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Clerk, if you would take the roll, please. Ms. Demuff, yes?
Adjourn debate on the motion is what we're voting on?
That was a motion to adjourn the meeting. So.
To adjourn the meeting, okay.
No, adjourn the debate on the motion.
Which would then call a vote on the motion?
I've asked
Yeah,
for a recorded vote.
so the motion is to adjourn the debate on the
Sub-amendment?
sub-amendment.
It's technically, I think the whole motion gets adjourned if
No,
there's a
we're on the
motion.
sub-amendment.
So we're on the sub-amendment, so we're going to take this as a motion to adjourn the sub-amendment.
However, point of order, Mr. Chair.
On a point of order, yes?
I would maybe possibly ask the clerk to clarify, if you make a vote to adjourn debate, is that only debate on the sub-amendment, or is that debate on the entire motion itself?
So we are engaging in debate on the sub-amendment, so if we're adjourning debate, to me, would be on the sub-amendment, but I'll check with the clerk.
Thank you.
I'm informed it would be a debate, vote on the whole motion. So we have a motion to adjourn the debate on the motion as amended as sub-amendment. So, Mr. Clerk, if you would take the roll, please.
Ms. O'Connell,
No.
Ms. Damoff,
No?
Mr. Gay,
Nope.
Ms. Zaid,
No.
Ms. Shannon,
No.
Ms. Denshaw,
Yes.
Mr. Mutz,
Yes.
Mr. Lloyd,
In favor.
Ms. Landsman,
Yes.
Madame Michaud,
En faveur.
Mr. McGregor.
No.
Yeas pour 5, nays contre 6.
So the motion passes. We are adjourned. Oh, sorry, the debate is adjourned. And there being no business, this is the end of the,
It was 6 no's.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair,
I
may have misheard,
apologize.
but I thought the
I apologize. I think I've gone into a catatonic state here. So the vote is to carry on. So we're going to carry on. We have Mr. Motz, followed by Ms. Dancho, followed by Ms. O'Connell, and followed by Mr. Gregor and Ms. Landsman. And if I fall asleep again, please, Okay. All right, so Mr. Motz, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think those who have been party to this, watching this debate, watching these conversations, this committee, just witnessed, I guess, the true politics of not really caring about our country or the foreign interference that exists in this country, that they would sooner, the Liberals and the NDP would sooner play politics with the issue of foreign interference and this information we've received, very serious information we've received about India and their interference and the acts that have been alleged to have occurred on Canadian soil. I'm very troubled by that. We have last Friday the emergency meeting, resulted in a motion that we supported, calling for meetings to bring witnesses in to talk about the foreign interference, the allegations of India's involvement in acts of violence on Canadian soil. And we had a number of witnesses that were on that list to provide briefings to the committee and witness to the committee, evidence to the committee that would help us further understand this issue, and then to take the issue beyond just an understanding, but some action, and that would go back to the House and force the government to take this seriously. Now, what I find really disturbing, beyond the obvious of the politics, is that while this committee is seized with a responsibility to explore the India-Canada events that have occurred, and this is just what it's met on the surface. There's probably a lot more going on that obviously we don't know about, and that we're stuck spinning our wheels talking about whether federal party leaders should receive a security clearance. And of course, we know that there are some serious limitations. I think the testimony or the comments made from Ms. May on Friday's meeting shone some light on the fact that there are things you cannot say after receiving this briefing. That is very, very clear. Another member of this committee and myself have top security clearance. We know the limitations that exist with receiving this information. What that means is that you've effectively put a gag order on leaders to be able to speak as freely as the Prime Minister is able to on some of these issues. That, you can't name names. You can't even take action, to be honest with you. And if you receive this briefing, now I think it's important to appreciate that even the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff has indicated that receiving this security clearance would prevent a recipient from, and I'll quote, using the information in any manner, even where that is even if that is not the case, briefing political parties on sensitive intelligence regarding an MP could put the leader or representative of a political party in a tough position, because any decision affecting the MP would have to be made without giving them due process. End of quote. That's from the Prime Minister's own Chief of Staff on the fallacy to believe that if all political leaders receive this briefing, they can go back and act. And we know that that's not necessarily the case. So, what our leader, the Conservative leader, Mr. Poilievre, has made very, very clear that, we take this matter seriously. We're asking for the names to be released, and action will be taken and should be taken by all parties should there be anyone found to be willfully complicit in assisting any foreign state. Now, what's interesting is the CSIS Act actually provides for an opportunity for people to receive information without receiving the security clearance. If you look at Section 19 of the CSIS Act, it talks about the disclosure of information. And it goes through a whole series of pieces of information. Some of it says, Section 19.1, information obtained in the performance of duties and functions of the service, meaning CSIS, under this Act shall not be disclosed by the service except in accordance with this section. Section 2 then goes on to say that the service may disclose information referred to in Section 1 for the purposes of the performance of its duties, functions under this Act, or the administration or enforcement of this Act, or is required by any law, and may also disclose such information. And I'll jump down to D, which applies. A, B, and C don't apply to what I'm referring to here. It says, where, in the opinion of the minister, disclosure of the information to any person or any entity is essential in the public interest, and that interest clearly outweighs any invasion of privacy that could result from that disclosure to that person or entity. I think it's quite clear that the minister has the authority to provide information. In this case, is what the NDP and the Liberals are after is that Mr. Poilievre received this security clearance. But the Act says that he can receive the information without receiving the security clearance. It's not necessary, because I would be hard-pressed to believe that anyone in this country would think that the public interest is not being served or is being served by withholding the names. The Canadian public deserve to know who these people are. They deserve to know. And then action needs to be taken if there's anyone who is an active member of Parliament who is not acting in the best interests of this country. So I'm shocked, actually, that there are those who would believe that it's best for our political leaders to be handcuffed, if you will, pardon the pun, and to not be able to speak what they know. And so I actually strongly support the leaders of our party, Mr. Poilievre's decision to not be gagged, not be limited in his scope of what action can be taken if the Prime Minister ever makes the decision, which he should in the best interests of this country, to release the names of those individuals who might be and who are alleged to have some willful involvement in protecting foreign states, working for foreign states against Canadians' best interest. It should be in the public interest that those names be disclosed. I can't think of any reason why the Minister of Public Safety, or the Prime Minister for that matter, would think that this is not in the public interest. It's alarming to consider the fact that we keep doing this little dance about whether or not the names should be released or not be released. If a leader of a political party is aware of the names because he's received this political briefing, they can then act. Well, it's quite clear that you really can't act. You're really prohibited from acting, which is unfortunate. Now, I know that Mr. Mulcair, the former leader of the NDP, has come out recently with some very strong statements on the position of this whole idea of the CSIS Act and whether or not political parties should have this briefing. And he says that he agrees with Mr. Poilievre's decision to not receive a security clearance. Now, Mr. Mulcair said, and I quote, "I completely agree with Poilievre's decision to not take the bait. Trudeau has been trying for a year and a half to restrain what Pierre Poilievre can do by trying to say, come and get this private briefing. And oh, by the way, then you'll be held to an official secret and you won't be able to talk about this anymore." End of quote. This is so true. And instead of this dark cloud hanging over Parliament, Canadians and parliamentarians necessarily don't know who's working for whom. And Trudeau should do what a leader is supposed to do: safeguard our nation, ensure that those working for Canada sit in the House of Commons, and those who sit in the House of Commons who aren't working for Canada should be exposed and dealt with according to law. Was that a dramatic statement that I made that somebody fell over back there? Or? Oh, okay. Sorry, Speaker.
You have that effect on people, Glenn.
Yeah, thank you. You know, and we know that politics is filled with political games, partisanship, and there's a time for it to go away. And when you're dealing with foreign interference, that's a time for it to go away, Mr. Chair. It's a time to identify those who are a risk to our country, a risk to our democracy. You know, and I will be so bold as to suggest that those who are actively working for the interests of other governments and other entities besides Canada and Canadians are traitors. And traitors need to be dealt with according to the law. And we need to ensure that the protection of our national security is maintained at all costs. The Prime Minister has released information more than once. He stood up in the House and to the media and talked about the murder of Mr. Nijar, releasing, you know, sensitive information. At the Hogue Commission, just recently, he took the liberty of, under oath, to speak what I would suggest very blatantly are complete falsehoods. And if they aren't falsehoods, where's the evidence? Present the evidence. Let's see the evidence. And he is not doing that. When pressed at that commission, he admitted that there are allegations of other members of other parties who also are of concern with respect to the security of information or the foreign interference. And I think it's important that those names come out, Mr. Chair. I think it's very important that Canadians who have lost trust in government over the last 9 years, and a lot of institutions, they've lost trust. And I hear that in my riding all the time about the losing trust in this government, and by extension, all government. And so it's, I think that the least that can happen, or should happen, is, you know, the information be provided, and that the minister make a decision, the Prime Minister make a decision, brief Mr. Poilievre without security clearance, as allowed by the CSIS Act in Section 19(2)D, that, you know, that allows the government to offer information to any Canadian, specific risks of foreign interference, without forcing them into sworn secrecy or controlling what they say. So Prime Minister Trudeau really has no excuses. He can and should release the names. Chair, I can go on, and I would pass my time to whoever is next on the list. But can you put me back on the list after, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. We go now to Ms. Dancho, followed by Ms. O'Connell, followed by Mr. McGregor, followed by Ms. Landsman, followed by Ms. May, followed by Mr. Motz. Ms. Dancho, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the perspective from Mr. Motz, given his experience on NSICOP for a time. So it is good to have those resources on the Public Safety National Security Committee of an individual who does have a security clearance, and I appreciate his expertise in that regard. I don't believe, I may be wrong actually, there may be others on this committee who have that security clearance, but not to my knowledge. So thank you, Mr. Motz, for your expert feedback in that regard. Mr. Chair, I did want to go in a bit more about what we've learned recently. I do feel that this is a concern. And so if we were able to study the motion that we had passed, and just to review, we had passed as collectively, unanimously as a committee, that we would have about 6 meetings, and we'd have the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Public Safety, the RCMP Commissioner, the National Security Intelligence Advisor, We have other experts. There was a little bit of politicking in there from the NDP, but there was certainly a lot of good experts on here, and we all actually unanimously agreed to, I believe, if memory serves, to have the CSIS director, the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, and the Deputy Minister of Global Affairs Canada, and other subject matter experts. So if we had a few of those individuals here today, we could ask them, for example, why is it that it was not revealed to Canadians? It was not in the U.S. indictment. It was not revealed to Canadians. This was not in the public domain. That the other Canadians targeted, allegedly by the Indian government or through the Indian government to various criminal entities, where there was an individual in Winnipeg who was killed. In fact, I remember that because it was 2 days after the Prime Minister stood in the House and made quite a bombshell statement about the Indian government alleged connections to the killing of Mr. Najjar. And then 2 days later, a member of the Sikh community was murdered or killed in Winnipeg. And it's been connected now, leaked from, allegedly from Canadian security officials to the Washington Post, that individual was identified to them, but not to Canadians, as Mr. Gilles. So I do find it odd that we're having to, again, learn from American news outlets things that security officials refuse to tell Canadians. And of course, Liberal government is the head of government, has been for 9 years. It's interesting to see the situation that they've created. We've heard the Prime Minister repeatedly talk about leaks and how they're, when the information first leaked to CSIS about Chinese election interference in various past and recent elections, the Prime Minister was more focused on the leaks than anything else. But then when it comes to a number of issues about this issue and others, whether he's on the public inquiry with Justice Hogue, he often says that he can't speak about it because of national security. And yet we have his own officials that seem to have leaked information to the Washington Post that was not made clear or not made public to the Canadian public. And so we have a situation certainly where the Sikh community in particular has been, I would imagine, and what we've heard from my colleagues in the Sikh community, quite notable colleagues, that the Sikh community, I represent actually a number of Sikhs, and I've heard from them that this is very unsettling for them. And I do feel that we have the obligation to ensure that we're doing our due diligence in this regard. There are a number of holes to fill. A lot of this doesn't seem to make sense in a timeline. It doesn't seem to add up. We're trying to piece together things that were allegedly leaked to the Washington Post that apparently Canadians aren't entitled to know, but a Washington Post journalist is. I think that may speak to certainly realm of secrecy and revealing intelligence when it suits the Prime Minister. I would like to know why this information was leaked. Did the Prime Minister know? Did he authorize it? Was it part of some sort of campaign to get the American officials on board? I would imagine a lot of American presidential staffers and congressmen and women and senators and others read the Washington Post. Was there some sort of strategy in that regard? Did we need the Americans to come out and help us because we're not able to stand up for ourselves after 9 years of the Prime Minister and his lack of strength in this regard on foreign interference? Why is it that they knew and we didn't know? So we could be asking officials that today. I mean, if the RCMP commissioner was here, which we have invited him, I would ask him, why he never acknowledged that Mr. Gilles' killing in Winnipeg, for example, I'm just going to read part of the Globe and Mail's reporting, was connected to India, nor did the RCMP reveal other sensitive information reported by the Post. And certainly we've also invited Ms. Drouin, she's the National Security Advisor, and Mr. Morris, who I believe, I don't, actually, do we have him on the list? Maybe perhaps we should add him. They denied any classified information was shared. However, as the Globe and Mail points out, I'll just quote it actually because it's better that way. The U.S. indictment identified the killing of Mr. Najjar, but never mentioned the names of the other two other Canadians targeted for the assassination, including Mr. Gilles from Winnipeg. And then it quotes a former senior executive at CSIS, Dan Stanton, who said the information, quote, about Mr. Gill's killing would have been considered classified as would the intelligence linked to Mr. Shaw, since it wasn't in the public domain until reported by the Washington Post. So it's interesting, everyone was focused on Thanksgiving with their families on Monday. I reviewed what the Prime Minister shared, what the RCMP shared, what Minister Jolie and the Minister of Public Safety shared, and they shared a little bit. But certainly we should have all just went and read the Washington Post article for real answers, I suppose. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but this isn't the first time we've had to turn to American media to get answers of what Canadian security intelligence knows. And yet we have a Prime Minister who goes on the public inquiry and sort of releases classified information as he sees fit. I find that very interesting, Mr. Chair, to weaponize it on one side and then to use it as a shield when you don't want to talk about things that perhaps aren't helpful to you on the other. So I just feel that, again, what sort of confidence are we supposed to have in a government that after 9 years we have multiple foreign governments interfering in our democratic processes and our institutions? We have alleged murders, in fact, by foreign governments in Canada. That's after 9 years of Liberals running the show. And we have a situation now where they don't feel Canadians are entitled to information, but Washington Post journalists are. We could be getting to the bottom of this today. I would really appreciate the opportunity to question the RCMP commissioner, the CSIS director, and others. But instead we have a situation where a motion has been put forward by the NDP, and this is something they knew that we would not be able to support. We made our position very clear. We do not feel that we would be able to fulfill our opposition duties to hold the government accountable if our leader is silenced. And I know Ms. May is with us. Perhaps she can chime in on this. I'm sure she will. But I remember her press conference, I believe it was the one in the spring, where she was talking about, how she read the unredacted version of NSICOP. And to Ms. May, I apologize, I'm just going to paraphrase what you'd said. But from memory, it was she didn't have any worries about anyone in Parliament. She was very confident about that. That was my takeaway from what she'd shared. But she'd also mentioned that she had to check with the RCMP on what she wanted to say. And I'm sure she did, because she had classified information. So imagine a world now where any time our leader wanted to speak or question others or speak to media or whatever it might be, fulfill his duty. He's brought this up in question period a number of times over the last year and a half, 2 years, where he'd have to check with the RCMP to see exactly what words and sentences he was allowed to share. I do feel that would put him quite in a difficult position. And so we won't be able to support this. We've made our position very clear on that. So we'll continue to talk about this. But again, I'll just offer, Mr. Chair, perhaps my words have moved the NDP. So I'd like to check in again, and I move to adjourn debate on this motion. I'd like a recorded vote.
So once again, we have a motion to adjourn debate. I'll ask the clerk to conduct the roll call.
Ms. O'Connell.
No.
Ms. Damoff.
No.
Mr. Gay.
Nope.
Ms. Zaid.
No.
Ms. Shannon.
No.
Ms. Dencho.
Yes.
Mr. Hannan.
Yes.
Mr. Mott.
Yes.
Ms. Landsman.
Yes.
Ms. Landsman, sorry.
Yes.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
Mr. McGregor.
No.
Yes pour 5, 5. Nays contre 6, 6.
So thank you. Once again, the nays have it. We shall continue with Ms. O'Connell, followed by Mr. McGregor, followed by Ms. Landsman, followed by Ms. May, and followed by Mr. Motz at the end.
Thanks, Chair. Well, let's remind Canadians what's actually happening with the Conservatives right now, despite their twisting themselves in pretzels and knots to try and fool Canadians. But Canadians won't be fooled. We are in this situation because Conservatives are filibustering our meeting because they don't want to deal with a very serious issue around national security. The members opposite, and I've written down some of their quotes, said, and actually Mr. Motz, who sat on NSICOP, talked about being handcuffed, being silenced if the leader of the opposition got his security clearance. But Mr. Motz, who sat on NSICOP, who had security clearance, as do I, as we sat together on that committee, spoke for over 15 minutes. Talk about handcuffing. He had no problem speaking for over 15 minutes about national security issues, even though he's been privy to national security information and a national security clearance. That's what Conservatives are trying to suggest. They're trying to suggest, on one hand, that they deserve to know this other information, but they don't want to be the ones to break the law to release it. They're saying things like, do what a leader is supposed to do. Well, isn't Mr. Poilievre trying to run to be Prime Minister of this country, yet he doesn't want a national security clearance? Is that leadership? Is that what Canadians expect out of a Prime Minister, to close their eyes to some of the most sensitive information in this country? If Conservatives feel that this information from NSICOP should be released, Mr. Motz, release it. No. Why? Why are they silenced? Because they understand that releasing national security information would harm Canadians, would harm agents in the field, and would frankly be illegal. But they're trying to suggest that the Prime Minister is hiding something, yet their own members would have every ability to release it if they felt that they wouldn't be then arrested for breaking the law. They talk about a lack of strength and getting to the issues around India, which we all have agreed unanimously to support that. It's incredibly important, but we can't get to it because we are in a filibuster, because Conservatives don't want to act like adults in the room. So you talk about a lack of strength. You know, it's not just previous NSICOP reports that the leader of the opposition, if he had his security clearance, could look at. The leader of the opposition could be briefed on the situation in India if he had his national security clearance, but he doesn't want to. So they send out their members here to get clips to suggest that they stand up for the Sikh community, yet the leader won't even get briefed on the actual situation. So they pretend to stand up for the Sikh community while not being briefed on it. I'm curious, as Andrew Scheer has met with Prime Minister Modi a number of times, what did they talk about? Perhaps Mr. Scheer should be a witness. Perhaps if the leader of the opposition had his national security briefing and could actually
Point of order,
understand.
Mr. Chair. Point of order.
Ms. Lansman?
I just want to correct the member. The leader of the opposition has been briefed, she says.
That's not a point of order.
You're on the list for debate. You can carry on the
Perfect.
debate. Carry on, Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Chair. It seems that I'm hitting a nerve with the Conservatives now, and hence why only they want to speak on this issue and then try to shut down the rest of the debate, because they want Canadians to believe that they are the only ones looking out for their security while actually not getting national security clearance of their leader. What are they hiding? What don't they want to know? Why won't they go into meetings with people like Prime Minister Modi, like Andrew Scheer has, and not stick up for Canadians? What are they hiding? And so, yeah, we're in this situation where we can't get to the very real work of this committee because Conservatives want to filibuster, because they don't want to be leaders of strength. They don't want to be informed, and they just are putting party over country. I was watching in the UK, they are talking about foreign interference as well Russia, China. And I found it interesting how opposition parties spoke to the Prime Minister openly about their united commitment to stand up against foreign interference. And what struck me so strongly was the fact that in this country, Conservatives seem to be the only party that is willing to put party over country. They don't want to have the briefings because they don't want to know the facts. They like to make wild accusations without knowing the facts. They don't want to know what's going on in their own party with what members. They don't want to stand up for Canadians here at home. Instead, they want to attack for their own political advantage. And I'll remind the committee members that when the leader of the opposition was actually the Minister of Democratic Institutions, and when he was asked about foreign interference and why they did nothing, he said it wasn't politically advantageous to do so at the time. Wow. So this is a long history of the leader of the opposition not taking national security seriously. We now see the Sikh community being impacted by their willful blindness. So if I'm wrong, Mr. Chair, then let's have the members of the Conservative Party stop their filibuster and let's vote. Mm-hmm. They can put their money where their mouth is, and let's vote on this and get to the India study. And if not, Mr. Chair, if they continue to filibuster, then I think we know exactly the fake kind of presentation they're trying to show Canadians, that they're not actually standing up for the Sikh community. They're standing up for the leader of the opposition so he can skirt his responsibilities to this country, and so that their party can continue to pretend that they care about national security while just putting their own political aspirations ahead of our national security. I think it's something every Canadian should see very clearly. And let's see. Let's let them vote. Let's see where the votes lie, and let's get on with the work. But if the members opposite filibuster, then that sends a very important message to the Sikh community in particular, that the Conservatives will put their own political advantages over us getting to the bottom of members of our community and Canadians being targeted, and Conservatives don't care about that. So let's see. Time to vote. Let's vote. And let's see where Conservatives actually fall.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. We go now to Mr. McGregor, followed by Ms. Landsman, Ms. May, Mr. Motz, and Mr. Helen. Mr. McGregor, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the last two votes to adjourn, I'm certainly not going to let the Conservatives get off that easy because, for Canadians who are watching the committee proceedings right now, the Conservatives are essentially running interference and defense solely for their leader. And they simply do not have any justifiable reasons for this charade to go on any further. Their leaders' reasoning for not getting security clearance has been thoroughly debunked by multiple national security experts. And I do believe that given the seriousness, because this issue has come up in the past, but given the fact that we had these RCMP revelations come out on Thanksgiving Monday, I think the game has changed significantly right now. And if you look at what is contained in that RCMP report, the references to very serious criminal activity on behalf of the agents of the Indian government, I believe this is a time where we have to put our country first, where the partisan interests of our party need to come second to the interests of Canada. And I believe the interests of our country right now demand that we form a united front, and that means all federal political party leaders getting the clearance necessary to receive those briefings so that they can make informed decisions within their own caucuses, and so that our foreign adversaries can see when they look at the House of Commons, yes, we've got our political differences. We fight very hard on the floor of the House on many different issues. But when it comes to an issue as serious as foreign interference, we stand united, and we have a united front where all political party leaders are getting the briefing necessary to take relevant actions. Now, I want to refute a few points that were brought up in argument by my Conservative colleagues. Now, Mr. Motz earlier talked about the CSIS Act. And I just wanted to quote from Wesley Wark, who has been at this committee many times, who has been a member for both Liberal and Conservative governments as a national security advisor. He has briefed them. And I just want to quote from this iPolitics article. Quote, Wark also shut down the idea previously floated by the Conservative Party that the federal government had other avenues of briefing Poilievre on the critical information that don't involve a security clearance, namely invoking the threat reduction measures included in the CSIS Act. Quote, he's playing with the public on that one too, said Wark. Threat reduction measures are not meant to be a tool to provide intelligence to people. They've been used as a workaround by CSIS because they don't otherwise have the authority to share intelligence. The important thing to understand about threat reduction measures is that they are targeted. They are not designed to provide broad information. So that directly refutes the arguments that were just made by Mr. Motz at this committee. This is a time when I think the continued refusal of only one leader in the House of Commons to get security clearance is raising far more questions than is necessary. And, questions such as, what could possibly be holding back the leader of the opposition from getting it? Is he even able to get it? Are there concerns about his ability to apply? Is that why he's not making it? And the other thing that's bringing me quite a bit of levity is the fact that my Conservative colleagues love to quote from Mr. Mulcair, the former leader of the NDP. I haven't spoken to Mr. Mulcair since 2017. He doesn't represent our party anymore. He is paid, I believe, by CTV to be a political commentator. He is not a national security expert. And so if he's on the air and you're quoting him as an authoritative source and you're completely ignoring the many CSIS officials who have spoken out on this measure, I think you're obviously doing the argument here a complete and total disservice. So I also want to talk about some other quotes on this particular subject. So on the Hill Times, former CSIS executive Dan Stanton was also quoted, and I'll read from the article here. Stanton said Poilievre deserves criticism for not getting a security clearance. He said that classified data is necessary for the Conservative leader to take action on any compromised members of his party. He said Poilievre's explanation that his chief of staff takes briefings is, quote, ridiculous. Briefing his chief of staff is pointless, said Stanton. He cannot advise Poilievre as to the contents of the briefing, nor can the chief of staff take action a party leader can and should. I want to also go back to the iPolitics article because there are more quotes here from Wesley Wark, who basically said that the arguments being made by the leader of the Conservatives is nonsense. Mr. Wark said that the Tory leader is knowingly misleading the public by claiming he doesn't need the clearance because of his chief of staff has received briefings. Quote, Pierre Poilievre's idea that it's sufficient for his chief of staff to be briefed for him and for his chief of staff to share that information with him is complete nonsense, Wark told iPolitics. And Poilievre, having been a former Privy Councillor and minister, knows it's nonsense. Ward Elcock, former director of CSIS. I don't think you can get more authoritative than that. Both Wark, both Wark and Elcock agreed there is no reasonable justification for Poilievre not to pursue a security clearance. And I know in conversations that I have had in private with the RCMP and with CSIS, they absolutely would like it to be a fact that every single federal party leader has the necessary security clearance. Now, everyone keeps on talking around this table about, a gag order being placed on the leader. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure it's actually physically possible to place a gag on the leader. He's not a verbally challenged person. But they're missing the point completely here. This is not about what you can and cannot say. This is about actions. And the leaders of each party wield an incredible amount of power in their caucus. I mean, that's just been a trend in politics. There's been a a centralizing focus of power. And in each party, in each caucus, the party leader has the ability to determine who has what parliamentary roles, who sits on what committees, and most importantly, who gets to have their nomination papers signed to run under that party's banner in the next election. So there's a huge difference between intelligence and evidence, which is why our national security experts are quite loath to have the names just released out into the ether, because there might not be room for a proper judicial process. So I think we have to respect those very real fears, Mr. Chair. And I'm not saying this is our national security experts, the people, the men and the women who work in the field. But if a party leader is aware that there may be some compromised individuals in their caucus, this kind of clearance would allow them to take the necessary briefing to ensure that that person is nowhere near sensitive parliamentary proceedings. And I think the most important for Canadians, so that they can have confidence in our elections, that leader can also make sure that that person does not run under their party banner. So again, Mr. Chair, all of the arguments that have been put forward by the Conservatives and by their leader have been directly refuted by men and women who are former and active members in our intelligence and security agencies. If the leader of the Conservative Party thinks he knows better than them, he should have the courage to go on the record and say so, level with Canadians. Because right now, it's becoming increasingly clear that this is nothing more than a partisan charade. It is meant to I don't know what the actual reasoning is, but I think the Conservatives have definitely painted themselves as agents of chaos in this Parliament, and this is yet another example at a time when we should be taking this extremely seriously. I would love to get to our study in India. We have a study going on in Russia. There's all kinds of important matters that this committee needs to be seized with. And it's great that we had that unanimous consent last week to get into that. If we are serious about that, let's get to a vote. Let's get to a vote. Let's get this to the floor of the House of Commons. Maybe we can have a concurrence debate, and then the wider House can be seized with this issue, and we can have a debate about what the right course of action is. I don't think that this going on and on serves Canadians, and so I would urge my Conservative colleagues to stop their speaking spots, listen to the evidence that's been presented by multiple people who work in this field, and let's get on with this. Let's show our foreign adversaries that while we may have our political differences, on this front we stand united. We stand united in wanting all of our federal party leaders to have the security clearance and briefings necessary so that they can take the actions within their respective caucuses and make sure that in the next election there is no candidate who might be compromised by a foreign power. I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We go now to Ms. Landsman, followed by Ms. May, Mr. Motz, Mr. Howland, Mr. Shipley. Ms. Landsman, go ahead, please.
Thanks so much. During this committee, I guess on the heels of what I witnessed last night in the House, where Liberal member after Liberal member came up to debate in an emergency debate last night on this issue and spoke directly to those in many of their communities, and frankly right across the country in all of our communities, about the pain that this has caused the community. This is of course after on the heels of the NDP bringing forward a motion in the House to set up a parliamentary committee to study interference from India as a standalone committee, and through right after question period, and it was actually Kevin Lamoureux who ran back into the House, or ran back into a seat, I should say, and said, no, we cannot have this. And then today in this committee, we've got members who have put forward this motion after getting complete agreement from everybody on this committee, from every party, to study the importance of of interference from India, and then they get this unserious motion. And what they've done is the NDP has helped the Liberals again block us from doing this work. And so that happened the first time yesterday when Kevin Lamoureux said no to blocking an actual committee of the House that can do this. And today we see on 2 occasions already that both the Liberals and the NDP have blocked this committee from doing the work that it was supposed to do. We could be hearing right now from the head of the RCMP, CSIS. We could be hearing from all of these. And, you know, watching members of the House from every party speak to the importance of this last night in a way where I think this has created great division in the country. I think it's division caused by the Prime Minister, but it's created great division between communities. And the seriousness of this issue was certainly something that we saw in the House from all members. The very fact that they said no to a committee and then no to this, no to a study in the Public Safety Committee suggests that their actions are really different than their words in every single community, not only for the Sikh community, but for every single community on every single issue. And foreign interference, you know, we're speaking about India today, given the revelations and the seriousness of the RCMP press conference on that holiday Monday. But on every single issue, it's always divide and distract. Whether it's the interference that was ignored from Beijing by the Prime Minister, the Chinese police stations that were found to be operating in this country, whether it's interference from the regime, the tyrannical regime in Iran, which this government refused to deal with for the better part of 6 years by not listing the IRGC as the terrorist organization, allowing 700 agents that we know of to intimidate communities, to raise money, to organize, whether it's interference from political interference from any number of places. The Prime Minister has allowed Canada to become a playground for these activities. And every single expert, every time you read it, there's more and more that is revealed. And it is revealed because of the Hogue Commission, a commission that only came to existence after the Prime Minister appointed his family ski buddy to be a rapporteur and produce a Coles Notes version of a report. And then it was only after Conservative pressure that we now have this Hogue Commission. And clearly, we found out more from the Hogue Commission than we ever did from Mr. Johnson's Coles Notes on the issue. And I think that was deliberate by the government to instill a friend and somebody who would be friendly to the interests of the Liberals who have benefited from foreign interference. We know that as well. The Hogue Commission has given Canadians more interest. And what I don't understand is that anybody watching this sees that this motion is on the table, a political motion on the table. We could very well be studying this issue. But first, it was Kevin Lamoureux who said no to the committee. And now we see the Liberals and the NDP working on stopping this committee from getting to the work done. There are lots of questions that you can ask today as to, why the Washington Post has information that Canadians don't even have in a briefing that was sanctioned by politicians in this country, politicians in the governing party, to be given. I think Canadians have way more questions than they have answers to, and I think this government has increasingly failed on this issue, and it's becoming very, very clear. We've seen the Prime Minister last week, particularly at the Hogue Commission, where if you think it's inappropriate to name names, which is some of the nonsense arguments that we've heard from everyone, if you think it's inappropriate to name the names of those who have either wittingly or unwittingly been part of foreign interference efforts in any way, then you should think that it's equally inappropriate for the Prime Minister at the Hague Commission to be talking about, to be casting aspersions, frankly, on members of Parliament, be it Conservative or Liberal. If I'm a Liberal, and I understand that there is a bit of a mutiny against him right now, whether it's 20 or 30 or 40 people, we don't know. Certainly they can maybe apply to speak at caucus tomorrow and make make it all known to the Prime Minister that they don't have confidence in him anymore. But in all of that, the Prime Minister, you should be furious with the Prime Minister. He's just put on the table, and in such an inappropriate way, he's cast aspersions on every single member of Parliament in this place, including those in his own party. He says that Liberals are involved. I mean, if you ask a few more questions and you prod a little bit, he certainly didn't offer that information, but he said that. And if I'm serving as an MP, still hoping to get into cabinet in the dying days of a Liberal government, and he's cast an aspersion about my allegiances to the country, I would be furious. But that's sort of neither here nor there. Let's talk about the Prime Minister's failure on the foreign interference file. Frankly, more generally. I mean, it's the Hague Commission that let Canadians know, still don't have answers to this, but why a CSIS warrant sat on the desk of a minister in this government for 54 days, a warrant about a Liberal power broker that could actually have an effect on the election of a member that we sit in the House of Commons with. And we know this is true. We know that members of parties, and that's frankly all parties, have been the target of this. We've had members of parties actually be at the Hague Commission. In fact, a member from our party testified at the Hague Commission about being targeted by a foreign government. His family being targeted by a foreign government. Look, back to the Hague Commission. If the Prime Minister, who is supposed to be there and supposed to act with the dignity of the office, and the Prime Minister is able to say that there are some members that are involved in this, we want to know why he wouldn't release the names. Why not put everybody on a level playing field? Why not protect the people in his own party that have served him loyally for 9 years, hoping that things would get better in this country? Why not put their names out? Because if you can talk about party affiliation and you can talk about when and where they are in their career, then certainly you can put those names out, because I think that's what Canadians want to know. And I'm happy to talk about this motion for as long as it takes, if it means doing the responsible, accountable thing of releasing the names. Now, with the idea of being sworn to secrecy, I can only just give you the example of how ineffective the NDP leader has been because he's been sworn to secrecy. I can only tell you how ineffective the Green Party leader has been because she's been sworn to secrecy on this. In fact, their stories don't even match. And if I was them, I would want to at least be able to tell Canadians that the foreign interference that the Prime Minister is talking about very openly in the Hague Commission, that he has actually done something about it. Now, we know that he did something with one member, the member from Don Valley, Don Valley North. We know that he no longer sits in caucus. But if the Prime Minister has evidence of others, frankly, who are engaged in foreign interference, then the Canadians should ask the questions of what has he actually done about it. And the answer is nothing. There is a long paper trail of evidence. There's a long paper trail of evidence of foreign interference in every part of our political process, whether it's in nominations. And by the way, I know that lots of things are said in committee when you're trying to argue, but the Leader of the Opposition was briefed on this on October 14th. And after the Reform Act was passed, to my NDP colleague, leaders don't sign nomination papers, official agents do. But I don't want to like get facts in the way of their arguments, but if you're actually going to tell Canadians, if you're going to explain to Canadians your position, then I think that you should do it in a factual basis. And here's the factual basis, that this Prime Minister has used foreign interference to be the most divisive Prime Minister in the history of this country. And I think that's the one clear takeaway from the debate last night, that we are a country divided. We are a country divided based on where you come from, when you got here, what language you speak, what your customs are. And unfortunately, it is the Prime Minister who is at the forefront of all of that. And he's using this issue of foreign interference to drive further division into the Canadian public. And you don't have to go very far to see it. You could see this division playing out in the streets. You can see it on the streets with the protests happening right now in almost every major city, with absolutely nothing said from the government about where that funding is coming from or whether those protests are organic. I suspect they are. I suspect they are not. In fact, there is evidence that they are not. You know, I want to go back to the issue of clearance, because that's what we're discussing at the crux of this motion. And I want to talk about how political parties have acquiesced to the Prime Minister silencing them. There used to be a time, and in fact, that was when Thomas Mulcair was the leader of the NDP, that the NDP was an actual opposition party, and they took those responsibilities seriously to hold the government to account. And that was, I think that was a better time for the NDP. And even he agrees. He agrees certainly that taking security clearance would only muzzle the leader of the opposition in being able to do his job. In fact, here is he saying is, I completely agree with Poilievre's decision not to take the bait. Trudeau has been trying for a year and a half to restrain what Pierre Poilievre can do and what he's trying or do by trying to say, come and get this private briefing. And oh, by the way, you'll be held to an official secret. You won't be able to talk about it anymore. Wise words from a once opposition leader when the NDP was in actual opposition. But here's another one. According to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, she said that it would prevent a recipient from using the information in any manner, even when it is not the case. Briefing political parties on sensitive intelligence regarding an MP could put the leader or representative of a political party in a tough position, because any decision affecting the MP might have to be made without giving them due process. Like this is right from the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. So you have the leader of the former leader of the NDP, who I understand doesn't talk to some of the caucus, but neither here nor there, when the NDP was a respectable opposition party. And you have the Prime Minister's own current Chief of Staff saying exactly the same thing. So I guess there's still agreement. And I know that the leader of the Green Party, Miss May, had brought up some issues about how she couldn't release the names. And she's right in the sense that she can't release the names. But in fact, it is exactly our point that she is restricted on what she is allowed to say. And I suspect if I'm her, I'm probably furious about the fact that you continue to see foreign interference from not only from India, but from more and more countries in Canada. And you have to stay silent about it, watching the Prime Minister do nothing at all about it. The Prime Minister has actually demonstrated, and this would make me angry too if I was muzzled with the security clearance. He's actually demonstrated that he is able to publicly communicate classified information, like he did on the matter that brought forward these charges and this study at committee. So it's not that he can't. He's withholding. It is that he's withholding information. He's withholding releasing the names. I think back to the conversation of releasing the names. I think it's incumbent on the Prime Minister to release the names. I think it's what Canadians want to hear. In fact, I probably have the experience of many parliamentarians where because he is thrown everybody into the same mix on talking about whether it's Conservative members or Liberal members, members of Parliament who are not there, former senators, whatever is out there. It sort of casts aspersions on everybody. And once in a while, you get those Canadians who believe that without any evidence, because the Prime Minister put out there that you are somehow involved in foreign interference. And I think that it would actually benefit every single member, and certainly the members of the Liberal Party, who we know are on this list. It would benefit them if the Prime Minister actually just released the names. We want to see the names released of all of the times where the Prime Minister failed to act on foreign interference, where he failed to do anything about the Beijing police stations, of when he failed to act on nomination candidates where memberships were bought and sold, where this actually had an effect on who ran as an MP, potentially, or at least we know, sitting in the House of Commons right now, where he failed to do anything about the terrorists that lurk in our midst, that terrorize communities. And we heard that all. We heard that all yesterday in Parliament over last night's debate. And yet we are sitting here debating what is the unserious part of a serious issue that affects more and more Canadians as we see. And I think that it should be known to Canadians watching this that instead of studying this issue, and frankly, first, instead of having a committee, which the Liberals said no to yesterday, even studying this in a committee that already exists, where a motion was passed, where they got agreement from every party. Rarely happens here in the House of Commons, but because of this issue, you get agreement from every single party to study the importance of this issue. And yet, the political stunt put forward by the NDP, supported by the Liberals, the coalition working again to stop the study of something very important, to stop the study. I suspect the Liberals have an interest in stopping the Minister of Foreign Affairs come here and give probably 4 or 6 positions in the hour that she would sit here, stopping the Minister of Public Safety from coming to this committee, stopping representatives and the head of CSIS and the RCMP from testifying at this committee. Instead of doing the work, we're in a motion right now, and I want people to see this. I want people to see the very fact that that this motion, after passing a serious motion to study the issue of Indian interference, is the thing that's holding the words that you hear from the government on caring about this issue, on caring about the members of the community that affects, and the actions that we see, stopping the study of this. Now, I'm going to put forward another, because I think that we should show people at home once again that that the Liberals and the NDP are working together to stop us from getting to the bottom of this, to stop the study of committee. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to move a motion to adjourn on the motion.
To adjourn the debate or moving to adjourn the meeting? Ms. Landsman,
Sorry?
you're moving to adjourn debate or moving to adjourn the meeting?
Moving to adjourn debate, so we can get back to the business of the study.
That's enough. Mr. Clerk, if you would call the roll, please.
Ms. O'Connell.
No.
Ms. Damoff.
No.
Mr. Guerre.
Nope.
Ms. Zaid.
No.
Ms. Shannon.
No.
Wait. Who's she subbed in for?
Mr. McDonald.
Ms. Landsman?
She's not something, she's an extra.
She can't vote. So, Ms. Landsman, you're actually not subbed in for anybody on this committee at the moment, so you can't move that motion.
Then I guess I'll continue talking.
Okay.
Perfect.
How is it?
So, look, I'm sure that one of my colleagues will move that motion because they feel exactly the same way. about this. That this motion that we are debating, entirely political, actually stops us from doing the work that we need to do. But I'm absolutely fine talking about the failures of this government on foreign interference, which we have seen play itself out over the last 9 years. This particular issue has frankly have proven that the Prime Minister has failed on foreign interference. Again, the Prime Minister at the Hague Commission admitted that our intelligence agencies have been gathering information on India, and that they've been committing foreign interference on our soil for a number of years. And yet it's clear that he did nothing to act on this. Now, he didn't need secret clearance to be able to say any of that at the Hague Commission. He didn't need anybody else to have secret clearance when he got up in the House of Commons and gave out information about what we knew and when we knew it at the time. He certainly didn't need anybody else to have clearance. He doesn't really need clearance to be able to walk over across the House of Commons, take 10 steps, tell the Leader of the Opposition if there are members in his party, like he suggested at the Hague Commission. Look, if the Prime Minister has nothing to hide, then I think Canadians have a very reasonable question about why wouldn't he release the names? Is it that they actually sit in his caucus or in his cabinet and that he's done nothing about it? Anyway, this all casts aspersions on certainly members of Parliament, but I think it casts a greater amount of scrutiny on the Liberals, who perhaps have members of their own caucus, members of their own cabinet, perhaps committee chairs, perhaps parliamentary secretaries who have been involved in foreign interference. And it's the Prime Minister who's really withholding that information from Canadians. So back to the foreign interference that he's done nothing on. Even when the Liberals were given the opportunity to be protected or to protect Canadians from extortion, Bill C-381. It was brought forward by my co-deputy leader, the great Tim Uppal, who worked hard to speak to communities right across the country about an extortion issue. I know that some Liberals didn't want to look like they were voting against the bill, so some of them were absent because they know that extortion has gone up 3 or 4 or 5-fold in their communities. I get that, but what I don't understand is that a party seized with this issue, or claiming to be seized with this issue, votes against an extortion bill that would put these violent offenders behind bars. Extortion, of course, is one of the things that the RCMP, one of the crimes that the RCMP highlighted during their press conference that happened on the matter at hand. But voting against his Protection Against Extortion Act makes very little sense. In fact, it makes very little sense that the Liberal members have taken unseriously to the rise in crime in our country. First, it was Bill C-75, which allows violent repeat offenders out on bail, sometimes minutes or an afternoon after they commit a crime. It's C-5, which allows people to serve a sentence in their basement after repeatedly stealing cars. For example, they have made this country a more dangerous place. And when presented with the opportunity to work on things like extortion, members of this government, members of the Liberal Party, members of the House of Commons decided, no, we are not going to take this issue seriously, even though it's the one that they purportedly are taking seriously now because the RCMP came out and said that it was part of the issue at hand. The United States managed to thwart an assassination attempt on American soil by agents of the Indian government. Canada was unable to do that, and I think that conversations like that would be best served or best had with the witnesses that we all agreed to in this study before this motion was brought forward. And I think that I speak on behalf of many and on our side of things to say that it is a great shame that we are not looking at the seriousness of this issue, and that we are holding. We are holding hostage an actual study. After the Liberals said no to a committee, you would think that they would do something to reverse themselves, like they always do. After Kevin Lamoureux stood up in the House and said, we are not having a special committee on this. He spoke to members of the Sikh community and members of all other communities, and he said, no, we are not having this committee. You would think that the Liberals would want to at least have the study here, one that was agreed upon, and it is a shame. With that, it turns out, Mr. Chair, that was just enough time to have me subbed in. So I'm going to move the motion that I did in order for us to close off the debate on this motion, so we can get back to the work of committee that the Liberals and the NDP are stopping.
So I have again a motion to adjourn the debate. Mr. Chair, if you please take the roll.
Ms. O'Connell,
No.
Ms. Damoff,
No?
Mr. Gay,
No.
Ms. Zaid,
No.
Ms. Shannon,
No.
Ms. Denshaw,
Yes.
Mr. Mutz,
Yes.
Mr. Shipley,
Yes.
Ms. Landsman,
Yes.
Madame Michaud,
En faveur.
Mr. McGregor.
No.
Yeas pour 5, 5, nays contre 6, 6.
Once again, the nays have it. We'll go now to Ms. May. But before we do that, I just want to bring up a matter, kind of a housekeeping matter. So in relation to our study on Russian interference, we have a witness who has been invited in relation to the movie Russians at War. We have been contacted by the producers of that movie, offering to share a link to the movie for anyone who wants to watch it. Now, the committee, can't distribute that because it's only one language. So if you wish to receive that link, please advise the clerk, and he will share your email with the producers, and presumably the producer can show you the link. But anyway, that's my intervention. We'll go now to Ms. May. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all members of the committee. And I hope we will be able to proceed with a number of critical issues. This is the ultimately most serious issue that I think I've faced as a member of Parliament, the notion that, and the evidence from the RCMP, that a foreign government has committed criminal acts on Canadian soil, including homicides, and that it particularly targets one community, the South Asian community within Canada. I am going to try, Mr. Chair, to be as concise as possible. As you, I can't say my name was taken in vain, because it's always an honor to be called out for being ineffective by the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party. And I want to correct the record where I need to, but try to keep my comments fairly limited. I share with Ms. Landsman a sense that it was unfortunate that last night's emergency debate was unnecessarily, well, who can use the word necessary in terms of the hyper-partisanship we hear in Parliament. But to the extent that she mentioned that all parties got to speak, I did get to ask questions, but I didn't get a speaking slot. But I regret that last night's debate, not all members. I mean, I have to say Ruby Sahota's speech was excellent for Brampton North. There was an awful lot more partisanship than is appropriate, I think, when we're talking about an issue as grave as the emergency debate on the actions that the RCMP has alleged that the Indian government has coordinated against Canadians on Canadian soil. So to the extent that last night's debate may have been characterized as bringing more heat than light, in the time I have right now, Mr. Chair, I'm going to try to do the opposite and bring more light than heat. I'm going to start with the comments from Ms. Landsman just because I think it's important to remember that words matter and respect matters. And when we're dealing with issues which are obviously bringing a great deal of emotion to the fore, Canadians want to see us speak respectfully of each other and of other Canadians. So I just in reference to our former Governor General, the Right Honorable David Johnston, being referred to by Ms. Landsman as a quote unquote family ski buddy of the Prime Minister, I just want to remind everyone that when David Johnston was appointed Governor General of Canada, that decision was made by our former Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Stephen Harper. The decision and the appointment process for David Johnston as Governor General was at the time, and I recall it well, in 2010, extolled by many because Stephen Harper made the decision to have an expert advisory panel to keep politics out of it and to appoint an eminent Canadian to the role of Governor General. So because I respect and admire David Johnston a great deal, even though I did vote that the special rapporteur role was not working, that he should resign, I had a hard time with that vote because of the depth of my personal, I'll admit it, deep personal affection and respect for David Johnston. But as former Governor General, he should not be referred to in any parliamentary proceeding as a quote unquote family ski buddy. David Johnston served this country with extraordinary commitment and dedication, as did his wife during the time he was Governor General, and he continues to do so. Now, as his role as special rapporteur is directly of bearing on the motion before us from my colleague from Cowichan, Malahat Langford, who happens to also be a neighbor on Vancouver Island to Saanich Gulf Islands, there's no question but that leaders of opposition parties have never before had the right or the opportunity to ask for top secret security clearance. That opportunity was only created when David Johnston filed his report, which was not a Coles Note summary, but an effort to open up for more Canadians access to top secret information to understand the extent of foreign interference in our election process. So in his initial report, David Johnston said, there are top secret security documents that he had read that he thought should be available to leaders of opposition parties if they were able to obtain top secret security clearance. I took that opportunity as quickly as possible, and so I had my top secret security clearance in the summer of 2023. And I think it's important for all leaders to have that such that we can talk to each other without worrying that we're going to betray or violate what used to be called the Official Secrets Act, which is now the Security of Information Act. So again, I want to go to words matter and respect matters and continue along that. And just to respond to one of the other people Ms. Landsman mentioned, having denigrated our former Governor General, she praised to the skies Mr. Mulcair. Now, I also have a lot of respect for Mr. Mulcair, but his track record on words matter and respect matter isn't great. Back in 2005, the Quebec court found, and Mr. Justice Denis' decision was really hard to read if you want to respect an individual in public life. And I'm sure Mr. Mulcair would rather that he had not defamed a former member of the Parti Québécois cabinet, Mr. Duhaime. The language was found by Mr. Justice Denis that Mulcair used language that was imprudent, false, defamatory, malicious, and a number of other adjectives. So that was unfortunate. Lucky for Mr. Mulcair that the Quebec taxpayers paid the $95,000 judgment against him for having defamed the reputation of a former member of the Quebec cabinet. Moving on from there, I wanted to speak to some of the points that really, again, what language we use really matters here. So this goes to some of the points made by my friend, Ms. Dancho from Kildonan St. Paul's. I want to start with a bit of a short preamble. we've thrown around in debate members of all parties, and I'm not trying to find fault with anyone for using language that's imprecise. It's easy to use language that's imprecise. So we've variously referred to receiving briefings or taking an oath. I prefer to say that when you have top secret security clearance, you have access to read top secret security documents yourself. Now, to that extent, are you then muzzled? No. You can reflect, you can share, as I've tried to do. I've tried to, and it's Ms. Densho was working from memory, and believe me, Raquel, I'm not saying a single thing in criticism of how you recalled what I'd said in press conferences. It was months ago, and I know there was it was best efforts to recall what I'd said, but I never said there were no worries about what occurred in Parliament. We know from the committee report, which gets called it's always a hard acronym to say, the NCI COP report, but the Committee of Parliamentarians on National Security and Foreign Interference. We know from that report that, and I read the unredacted version, so I read the secret report. We know from that report that there were, in the language used by the parliamentarians, witting and semi-witting participation by people who might be sitting members of parliament. It led to a great deal of speculation and the atmosphere that began to, I was worried it began to approach being a witch hunt of, are there traitors among us? I didn't say there were no worries. I think foreign interference is a significant worry. I think we need to pay a lot of attention to it. And that's why I continue to urge Mr. Poilievre to get his top secret security clearance, because we need to be a united front as Canadian parliamentarians. We need to put Canada first and be able to say to any foreign government that thinks it, or non-state actors as well, any foreign interest that thinks it could interfere with Canadian democracy or worse, commit criminal acts on Canadian soil, know that you do not find any daylight between us as leaders, that we stand together to say there's no room here for foreign interference. Where we have soft underbelly spots in how our own political parties may operate, we need to tighten those up. We need to make sure we pay attention to the two places that were found to have the greatest vulnerabilities, nomination races and leadership races. Those we could clean up, those we could stand together. But back to some of the comments Ms. Densho made, I didn't say there were no worries. What I did say, and I want to repeat it so it's clear, because people variously said that I changed my story in some way. I have not. I am not muzzled. What I am is keenly aware that I can talk about what I've read as long as I don't violate the Security of Information Act. To violate the Security of Information Act is an offense for which you can be jailed. But more than that, and I have explained this before, not all information you read is of the same, runs the same risks to our security establishment. As Five Eyes partners, I certainly don't want Canadian security to be viewed as lax, such that other Five Eyes partners don't want to share information with us. That's why I completely agree with the findings of our former Governor General David Johnston, that it is significant, worrying, and unacceptable that anyone within our security establishment shared confidential and, in fact, privileged top secret information with journalists. That puts our security establishment in a position of being less trustworthy to other Five Eyes partners. I do think that David Johnston's report as special rapporteur was absolutely correct in that, not because I want to muzzle people or act out of partisan interest, but we have to ensure that down the line, those who have access to information which is top secret, protected by the Security of Information Act, do not feel that they can put, let's be clear, the Globe and Mail reporter who's got a great reputation, and for good reason, but Bob Fife can't be on speed dial to CSIS agents. And so we have another question today, which has just come up about the Washington Post. I'll turn to that in a moment, because I think it's important and needs to be investigated. But this isn't about muzzling people. This is about, as parliamentarians, who have taken an oath of loyalty to Canada. That includes the Constitution of Canada and the laws of Canada. You don't go around recklessly violating the Security of Information Act. So just to correct the record, I never had to check anything with the RCMP before I spoke. But because when you sit down to read a top secret security document, you're not allowed to take notes. You're not allowed to bring any electronic devices in the room with you. You just have to rely on your own mind, your own ability to assess information, to read and remember what you've read. So when I went in to read the top secret security cleared document, which was the unredacted report of our parliamentary committee that included members of the Liberal, New Democrat, Conservative Bloc party, as well as independent senators, the committee, NSICOP committee chaired by David McGuinty. When I went in to read that, the only thing I brought with me, again, no pen, no cell phones, no electronic devices of any kind. They're under lock and key outside the room, and the room is windowless, so no one can train a telephoto lens on what you're reading from another building across the street. What I had, and no staff, none of my staff. So the Privy Council office had someone there to keep an eye on me as I read. The only thing I was allowed to bring in with me was the redacted public version of the committee's report so that I could cross-reference back and forth to see, okay, the redacted version says over here at page 32, paragraph 72 has had a significant deletion where it refers to allegations of Indian government interference in the Conservative Party leadership race. So I said, oh, okay. So let me read what it says where it's not redacted. That was the only point of reference. So before I made any public comments, because I felt it was incumbent on me as someone with top secret security clearance, to the extent that it was legal for me to do so, not to be muzzled, quite the contrary, to be able to be certain that I was absolutely not exposing any of our security assets to any risk, to work through the information I had and to say to experts in security, is it okay if I say that having read this report, I don't think there's any allegation or intelligence or evidence of proactive efforts by any currently sitting member of Parliament in the House of Commons to betray Canada in the interest of another country, that nobody here is a traitor? That's what I said. I stand by that. We do know there was a former member of Parliament. I think we should have an investigation of that individual. And again, as Alistair McGregor's made this point recently in this committee, I guess it was last Friday, it's really important. There's a distinction between intelligence and evidence. And to the extent that you can have a security operative somewhere around the world who says, we've heard blah, 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 but blah, blah, blah doesn't become evidence against an individual unless it's tested in court and it's actually pursued and it's actually researched. It becomes intelligence that's worth knowing. But I was very clearly warned by the officials in the security establishment before I get a press conference. If you say this part of the report out loud, it may look innocuous to you to share that, but don't share it because it could expose one of our intelligence assets actually to potentially being killed. So I took it very seriously to avoid saying anything that violated the Security of Information Act. I don't think that means I'm muzzled. Again, I urge Mr. Poilievre to ask for, you don't get it as of right, you go through quite a process, but I urge Mr. Poilievre to ask for top secret security clearance with the goal that all of us as federal party leaders from parties that have loads of differences with each other, but as individuals, we're Canadians first, political party leaders second. And if we were able to be on a level playing field where we all have top secret security clearance, and we could meet in one of those windowless rooms with nothing but other people with top secret security clearance, we could actually have an honest discussion about what do we do to demonstrate to the rest of the world and to all Canadians that we are a unified front, no daylight between us, in our commitment to end foreign interference in Canada. In our elections, that's what Madam Justice Hoag's inquiry mandate covers. And in this extremely serious set of allegations that the RCMP have uncovered, a criminal network operating within Canada, taking instructions from another government and threatening, and in fact, having already experienced homicides in Canada, which are being investigated by the RCMP. This could not be more serious. And to the extent that it's fallen into a partisan debate, that's unfortunate. But that's Mr. Poilievre's fault. He's the only one who can ask for his own top secret security clearance. So this will cease to be a political football. I say that knowing that my comment will be seen as partisan by my friends in the Conservative Party, from Medicine Hat, Cardston, Warner, and from Kildone and St. Paul's. I mean, God knows I think of you guys as my friends. I'm trying to be as fair and honest as I can here. I beg of you that Mr. Poilievre should be encouraged by his own caucus to ask for top secret security clearance. I wrote him back in June and asked him to do so. He's yet to reply to my letter. That's okay. I know he's busy, but it's important that we're all on the same page and able to deal with this. I would just like to say that I completely support the motion before you. I would vote for it if I were a member of committee and able to vote for this. If we can create, which I do support, a Canada-India special committee, I would like to ask other colleagues around this table to urge their parties to allow the Green Party to have a seat in that committee. I think we could be useful. We work hard. And as I said, we try to bring more light than heat. So I was really pleased last night. I think it was at 1 minute to midnight when the foreign affairs critic for the New Democratic Party, the honorable member for Edmonton Strathcona, said that she would support allowing a Green Party member of Parliament to have a seat on a committee I do hope will get established. I hope whatever party said no, and I wasn't in a position to see who said no to unanimous consent motion, so I won't speak to that because I don't have direct knowledge. But whoever said no, next time around, just let UC take place, but please rewrite the motion so that there's a seat on that committee for a Green Party MP. Lastly, I just want to refer to the allegations that we started this discussion this morning with the allegations in today's Globe and Mail. I'm not comfortable at all with the idea that Nathalie Drouin or the Deputy Minister for Global Affairs Canada, that they would have shared information with the Washington Post before Canadians knew that information. But I do note that representatives and spokespeople for both our National Security Advisor and for the Deputy Minister at Global Affairs Canada have denied that they gave briefings to the Washington Post. I do note that the story in the Washington Post for October 18th falls some days after, of course, October 14th, when the RCMP did a press conference. I do know that from the briefing I received from Madame Drouin and also from the new head of CSIS, Mr. Rogers, on October 16th, I did ask specifically, did the leader of the official opposition get this briefing? And they said yes, but they were unable to share as many details with him as they had just shared with me, because he doesn't have his top secret security clearance. I think it's very important. Again, I support this motion from Alistair McGregor. I think it's very important that we all encourage Mr. Poilievre to get his top secret security clearance, because otherwise it leaves a cloud over the question of how much foreign interference was there in the Conservative Party leadership race. But I do hope that this committee, when it gets back to the business of the discussion on the motion, to have a significant study calling before this committee as witnesses many of the people whose names I've just mentioned, that the question of this allegation that once again someone with security clearance sent information to a reporter. That needs to be investigated because we can't be, as a country, respected in the world that takes intelligence and information shared with intelligence agencies from other countries. They need to know that top secret information obtained through the work of intelligence assets around the world is protected. Otherwise, we could find ourselves frozen out of key information that we do need. And I don't think there's anything more serious than this. Obviously, I think climate change is a serious threat imminently. But when I talk about our obligations as parliamentarians, our obligations is to ensure that Canadian laws are respected. That includes respect for the Security of Information Act. Again, I don't feel muzzled, and Melissa, I don't feel angry or upset or any of the words you use. I'm honored to be able to play a role that I hope is helpful to Canadians in saying what I can talk about, what I can't talk about, and why. And none of the reasons put forward by Mr. Poilievre so far have impressed experts like Wesley Wark or Mr. McFadden. They don't make sense. Of asking for top secret security clearance, an opportunity we would not have had but for the report of David Johnston, back to where I started, is at this point an obligation of Mr. Poilievre's. I don't think it's a choice. I believe he is duty bound to pursue that so that we can unify as political leadership in this country, regardless how much we may disagree on other points. As Canadians, we must be unified in shutting out any foreign interference in our electoral processes, but even more so in the day-to-day lives of Canadians who must not be subjected to extortions or threats or actual experiences of physical violence, including death. This is no place for partisan politics. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. May. So we have overrun our time slot at the moment. I'm going to ask if the committee is in agreement to adjourn. We are adjourned. What's that?